Welcome back to episode 30 of Constructing the Enterprise J in Blender. So, I went ahead and did a little bit more work on the texturing and kind of started applying some of those. We'll come back in and take a look and see how those look in a minute, but just got to give you a lowdown what to expect in this episode and some changes that I have done. I have went ahead and made the decision on what deflector dish I am going to use. It's going to be this particular model here. And as you can see, I've also kind of went ahead and modeled it just a little bit further. I don't think there's any I don't have textures applied to it currently at this moment, so it's just a standard blue emittance field. But that's pretty much what it's going to look like. I thought it looked a little bit different. It still looks Star Trek-ish, for it being a deflector dish, and it still screams a little bit Federation. I mean, a little bit off on the key side of Federation technology, but I figured that it would kind of work. I mean, the Federation seems like that they're quote unquote borrowing, or not quote unquote, why did I do that? I'm putting quotation marks, borrowing, imagine Dr. Evil, borrowing, um, alien technology to apply to their ships. So, go back into, I think it was episode 25, we were talking about that. But, so I went ahead and applied some of the textures, and we're going to go ahead and take a look to see how it looks when it's applied it to here. This portion here is the impulse engines applied that. We'll look at that. Went ahead and this right here are these little areas here, which is for the additional drive that the ship uses to go from universe to universe, which I have theories about what type of drive that is, which we could probably go into that just a little bit. And this right here is supposed to be for the deflector dish, but I may end up changing it. But what we did is we went ahead and applied everything. I mean, we can see it if I go into here. We go into edit mode. You can see if I press in A, all of them to select all the vertices. It sees all the vertices being selected. And I went ahead and moved them around into their areas. Now, the reason about why you might see, this is only using half of this is only using half of this, because this is still in the mirror modifier. So if I apply that mirror modifier here, it's going to fill out. Hold up. These textures here are going to fill out on this side. So if I don't do that, then you're going to have one side here is going to be white, or there'll be bleed through. So that's why I went ahead and I did both sides. But let's go ahead and look into it to see what it looks like. So what I did is just, select, go into faces, select. I think you could press, what was it? Oh, select similar material, and it selects all of the devices, or all the faces that are using this particular type of material. In fact, I think you can also do select. What was it? Select. Yeah, select everything and through the materials, which is what we did here. So went ahead and did that, moved everything around and onto this. Now I don't. Now to get this on here, in fact, let me go ahead and start over from the beginning, just in case. I don't know if I might have explained this. I need to look back at some of my previous episodes and see whether if I kind of explained what we did here. But okay, what we did is we go into here and we select into the materials. I'm sorry. Okay, but let me go ahead and kind of real quick before we move on explain about how we went ahead and assigned the materials and how you can get it to where when you go into render mode you can see the materials. Is we have the material sign, which we called ours Glowy Bits, right here. And what we did is we go into material and we go ahead and we tell it to where we want a new material. So we go into here, we have the material, then we go into here and we go into, we click on it. So like if I want to go into lights off, I go over to here. Because we're selecting lights off, if I do new, there'll be a new texture within lights off. But what we want is we wanted Glowy Bits. We go into there. We tell it we want a brand new texture, and there's different ways that we can apply world texture, material, brush. This is if you want to paint. So we want to go ahead and we want to create a new texture. So we do that. We go into image and we either click here to go find the materials that we want, the image that we want, or if we already have it loaded, we go ahead and we go into here and we select it and we tell it we want to go to Glowy Bits, which is what I called, this particular texture here. We can go into Windows Maps, do the same thing, Windows Text, but I said we want Glowy Bits. And what I tend to find out is that if you go in and Photoshop and you modify this, so if I was to go in and I was to change all this up, I just click on this refresh button, and what it'll do is it'll look back in this file and reload everything. So all the changes that I've made into it in Photoshop will show, once it's saved, will show up to here. Then what I do is you go into UV editor mode, which would be UV image editor, and we just, once again, select what we're wanting to select and go over to here and we tell it which texture we want to use, which would be Glowy Bits. We can use any kind of texture that we really want to go up here. We make sure we tell it to go to Glowy Bits or the texture we're using, and then we can line everything up. Once you get that all said and done, once you go into rendered, we'll let it render up, and voila, there you go. You can see that the model slowly starts to render in, showing the texture. So there is the impulse engines, as you can see, and it's not too bad, not too bad. In fact, there's other things that we could do on this to make it look even just a little bit more realistic, not necessarily under Blender render, but under cycles render, which we'll do that in another episode. Looking at this, I can see that I'm going to have to model the inside just a little bit more, because that doesn't, this is all perfectly straight, which is what we want, but this is just a little bit too rounded. So once we get, I didn't notice that until I got the textures, and so I got to change that. These other engines, I still need to apply the texture onto these as well, which that's what we can go ahead and do today. But if you look right there, kind of gives it a little bit of a look. But the front portion, probably need a little bit more work. I'm not really too happy with the way that that looks. I was trying something with one of these little brackets here. I think we could see right here to try to make it look like it has a little bit more texture to it. Yeah, right there, as you can see, try to draw on this texture, but didn't really quite like the way it looks, so I'm going to be modifying that. I mean, we still got a lot of more quote-unquote glowy bits that we need to do. Why did I do that? Quote-unquote. I'm so silly. We still need to put texture on this. We need to put texture on those. Whole bunch of little textures. Some of this is going to go on glowy bits, but some of these are going to have their own maps. When we go out of solid mode, as you can see, these right here still doesn't quite have the right texture on it. Because one reason why that is because it's still assigned to deflector blue. So I go over here and I assign it to glowy bits. Right there, it should mirror on both sides. If we go ahead and select that all, now what you'll notice is if I click on all these, now if we do a U and do an unwrap, then we see the unwrapped image there. So if I select them all and we move it over to here, and looks like that if I just scale it along that Z axis, that should get us pretty close to where we want. And we can always go into render mode. Now this does take a while depending on how powerful your computer is. It might render a little bit different. Cycles render, I think, can actually render just a little bit faster, but I don't like usually working with it for personal reasons. But you can move this around and you can see the changes. So if I move this over to here, it'll show you the changes with a little bit of white there. So you can get the fine adjustment and see what it's like in real time. So that looks good. Now we're going to do the same thing on this other one here real quick. So a little bit while I'm doing this, a little bit on the, you know, uh, I know it's been a while since I released a video. I've been a little bit slow, and I kind of apologize onto that. I'm not going to really go too much into why I'm not posting the videos, but just once again, sorry. But to keep up with modern events, how many of y'all have watched the latest Star Trek? I just watched it just actually a couple of weekends, actually on the opening weekend. Usually I don't go watch movies on the opening weekend, or at least I never really did back in my younger years. My later years, though, for some reason, I tend to want to go watch it almost weekend. I guess maybe it's just, you know, impatience, I guess, that I have or what have you. But yeah, I watched the latest Star Trek, and um, you know what? I actually kind of like it. I still have a couple of my own little set of pet peeves on it, but a few little pet peeves on the Franklin, a few little pet peeves on the bad guys. But all in all, I think it was a real good movie. I think it's definitely a step in the another step in the right direction. I like the first one. Second one, I had so many problems with it. Um, this third one, I mean, it was definitely a lot better. It was a redemption. You know, you might probably say I looked at the second one, and some people might I know will argue with me on this. To me, it was almost like it was the Star Trek Five. Everybody remember how terrible Star Trek Five was? There was a lot of stuff that just really didn't make sense. Spoilers if you've never seen Star Trek Five, but Spock having a half brother, and the Enterprise having what was it, 73 decks, and you know all these little things were just a bit crazy, a bit too stupid. So didn't really like that, but that's what Star Trek 2 was kind of for me. There was just a lot of stuff in there that I thought just didn't work, wasn't silly, but this one was definitely a step in the right direction. So, getting back to the model, looks like everything is looking pretty good on that. Once again, still need to do some work on some of the bits, what we call the glowy bits. This portion right here, I'm going to be thinking about what to do with that. I might not necessarily use textures because inside here, there's a lot of other things that you can do, such as different types of um, filters that you could put in that might be able to get us the effect that I might want on this section. It's kind of the same thing if you see what we did right here. Because if I click on this, let me go ahead. Yeah, there we go. I went ahead. We gave it a new texture. You still have to give it a new texture, but I went ahead and I gave it this. This already predefined texture right here, which was marble. Is what we gave. And change the colors. And so that actually looks kind of good. That's not probably the finished result, but I might get something similar to that on this particular section here. In fact, I tell you what, since that is its own, okay, deflector blue, since we're not using deflector blue anymore on this, let's go ahead and do that real quick. So once again, we go into here, we tell it we want a new texture. I'm going to call this quantum drive. So yeah, we're going through here and I'm changing all of this. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and go out of this mode here just to take a look at all the ones. We got, yeah, let's see, voxel data, Veroni. That one's okay. Yeah, that one, point density, don't know what all these really are. Noise, nope. Let's try that one. All right, so we go to there. All right, let's go back into here. Let's change this to white. Let's see what type of look we get. Okay. Projection. If we change this around, we get little different looks to it. So let me go ahead and toy around with this a little bit just to see what we can get, and I'll be right back. Okay, kind of toyed around with it just a little bit and don't quite have the look that I'm very happy with, but um, it's getting in the step in the right direction. There's just a lot of little things that I need to toy around in here to, to try to get the look because I want to get a look like that there's a bit of movement through here, kind of like an energy and a bit of a power source, flowing through this. And for two reasons, because one, not only is this a part of additional drive, but I think maybe if you might remember me talking about is that I kind of always envisioned that this strut right here, there's no power source actually running through it. It's just structural integrity. The power source actually flows wirelessly, so to say, from this point to this point. So when it's in warp, you actually see kind of a force field or power source emanating from here going into this. And that's not too far off from what originally they kind of had in mind because you know I saw somewhere that they were, on an episode of Trek Yards, they were actually talking about, with Andrew uh, Probert, no, the one, yeah, the guy that was responsible for designing the Enterprise from the movie, from the films, actually. had it to where there was an energy field, a visible energy field that went from nacelle to nacelle. And that's okay. It was an episode they were talking about the rules of starship design. They were talking about well, they need to have line of sight of each other because there would actually be a field that would actually go in between the two. Kind of think, and I really hate kind of making this reference because, uh, well, the scene was actually pretty cool. Like the pod racers in episode one of Star Wars. There was a like a coupler, an energy coupler. So it's something similar to that. So it's kind of like that. So it's not too far off of the, what the intended, not what actually was seen, but the intended design of Starfleet ships. So, you'd have an energy beam right here. But I'm going to go ahead and kind of put texturing this back a bit on the back burner. And I've decided I'm going to go ahead and work and because this saucer section, I'm for the most part am actually done with it. Like I said, I'm not going to do a lot of the windows and stuff that I'm going to do is going to be in result to texture. I've already went ahead and modeled those windows, but I think that's enough. So I'm going to go ahead and texture this entire saucer section here. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do today. However, though, there is one little detail that I need to make on this. Before we get into that, let me go into camera mode. Oops. Go into camera mode here because I am going to click, oops, that. And is this thing supposed to be up higher than what it is? Yeah, actually, I think it's supposed to. Okay, that's right. That's one of those little anomalies that I'm not able to quite 100% match up, or at least in this one, but that's fine. That's fine. So we're going to go ahead and take this. Actually, that works out well. Let's go ahead plus that one more time, and I'm going to hide this. There we go. Because I'm going to do a little bit of work. Actually, let's do this. Collect this one. I mean, there's still a little bit more work that I need to do on the saucer section, but for the most part, it is done. But for the sake of this episode and for texturing, I am going to, oops, let's go ahead and, oh, did I not? There it goes. I'm going to do this. Let's go ahead. I think that's good enough. Let me go into here. What I'm doing here, and it'll definitely make more sense in, oops. What's the best way to do this? Well, what I'm going to do is there's going to be an exterior mesh, which is what we see here, then an interior mesh, because a lot of the fans have guesstimated, and for the most part, I think they're actually right, is that oops, that big light is actually supposed, that big light that we tend to see on the in center. There we go. That we see in the center of the Enterprise J is actually kind of like a large, atrium. It's a large, oh, you know what I forgot to do? I'll forget it. I'll fix it. Actually, no, that might be good enough. We'll see how that works. But it's a large atrium actually that where there might be like a park or a little forest or something inside it. So rather than seeing that white light that we see, I'm going to try something a little bit today. I've seen people do it before, but I personally have not done it myself. I'm going to try something to see if we can kind of make that look better to where instead of a white light, we actually see when we look inside an actual atrium, an actual little park and everything with trees and bushes and tall grass, so you can lose your ball in it. Uh, reference. So let me go ahead and finish that. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of work on some In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do just that today. We're going to go do that, to call that the episode, just work on the atrium. So you saw in the last episode how I went ahead and grab the textures. So we're going to go ahead and assign this whole thing here a brand new texture. So, oh, see, we're starting to kind of lose things. Okay, that's the only ones. So we're going to go ahead and let me just go ahead and create a brand new one. And we're going to call this Atrium. Sorry if it's not pronounced right. And we're going to go into here and give it a brand new texture and also call that Atrium. And now let's go ahead and bring back in those oops, hidden vertices. And oh, you know what I forgot to do? Let's go ahead and assign those to that. There we go. Now I'm going to go let's show hidden. Now we got these. I'm going to create another, that's not what I wanted. Let's create another one. We'll call it Atrium, whoops, Atrium window. Go into here and do the same thing. New texture, Atrium window. Go back into here and assign that. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into Photoshop, and I'm going to go ahead and create the atrium and come back in and apply that texture, and we'll see how that works. And everyone, we are back. It took me a little bit longer than what I intended for it to take because we went ahead and if you can see here, we switched from Blender render to Cycles render. This wasn't something that I've just decided to do at the last minute. I've always kind of had the decision that I was going to do that eventually. So I figured since I'm already texturing now before I get too far into it, might as well go ahead and make the change. And there's a little bit more involved into it to switch from Blender render to Cycles render. You just can't just tell it, I want to go to this render because Blender render uses the materials, while Cycles render uses what is called nodes, which you can go into the node editor and make some changes on some things. And I'm not going to go too far into how this all works in this particular episode. I figured that would work better if I was to do a whole nother episode. And maybe in the next episode, when I get more into the actual details of texturing, it'd probably make a little bit more sense. So let's go ahead and jump into a rendered option here to see what we did. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that we've got ambient occlusion put on, and okay, voila, here we go. It is now rendered. So it does look a little bit better than what it did originally before. Now with Cycles render, what it is a little bit more of an intelligent version of rendering. It actually is able to kind of calculate or tries to take in consideration about what light is actually doing inside a scene, because light, it's a photon, it actually bounces around. It just doesn't always hit an object and absorb it, unless of course it's black. Black absorbs all light, white reflects all light. So it's actually trying to go in and figure out exactly each one of these textures or a lamp that I put into the scene that is emitting light. All right, looks at the normals and it figures, okay, light is bouncing this direction here, so does it have anything to bounce on, or does it keep going? And if it bounces off that, how much strength does that photon have? How far does it go out? So think of it like this way with the moon, night on a full moon. When you have a full moon, the moon itself doesn't actually emit light. It actually reflects light from the sun. So light hits off the moon and it bounces off the moon and it actually comes back to Earth, which is why when you have a full moon night, it looks much brighter outside because you have light reflecting off of it than on a new moon, where there is no moon or the moon is completely blocked from the sun because there is no light bouncing back. And we get a better example of what that looks like if we go into if we remove the ambient occlusion. Because if you see, like right here, we not only have this particular part of the mesh that is lit, but you can actually see that there is, exterior portions of the mesh which is actually being lighted by that material. You can see a little bit more back here. Once again, it's actually calculating the light is bouncing off of this based on the normals that the mesh is designed. So it bounces off, so it knows that some light's going to come off of this, bounce off of this, and go someplace else. And its cycles render does tend to render a little bit faster because it uses my GPU of my laptop. Now, I only got 10 cycle or 10 samples, so if you really kind of zoom in, especially in these low light conditions, it looks kind of grainy. I can set that up and to where it has a lot more samples that it takes, so this wouldn't be grainy. It would be actually a lot more filled in. So it's kind of like in low light conditions. Think of it similar to, um, similar to like maybe a low light level on your phone. It's going to increase the amount of exposure time that it's taking in as much light as it possibly can. Now the cycle renders, it's a lot more. There's a lot more options. I mean, we could set up the tracing samples, and you look right here into the node editor. You got to use these nodes here, to see exactly, when it's calculating all this. It's going through all these nodes. Like here's the very first node, and it goes through there, follows this pathway, and it sees that it goes up into here into transparency and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of a flow that it's going through to try to figure out how it's going to render this scene here. Now, if we take a look at real quick right here on the Atrium, you can see that it is actually kind of, let's go ahead and just view just that, and let's go. Now this is the Atrium that I'm working on. Now the texture didn't quite turn out just the way that I wanted it to look, so I'll have that fixed in the next episode. But we have a texture of a park here. The reason why it looks the way it is because, turning on back ambient occlusion here, oops, is that this saucer section is actually mirrored twice. So I'm only working on this one quadrant here, and it's mirrored this way and this way. So the texture, I'm only able to UV map just this much of this section. But it's difficult to see from any angle that I can apply here. But this is actually two separate sets of faces, where if I go into edit mode and go off of rendered mode, you can see to where we have here is one set. Oops, actually, you know what? Let me go into, okay, well, let me do this. Here is one set of meshes. If I go Control plus plus, and there's a couple of more that is hidden. But this texture, this mesh right here actually has the Atrium in texture on it with a bit of emission, so it's emitting a little bit of light. But also, if we go into, we bring back, there's a whole other set of textures right here, or not textures, I'm sorry. There's a whole other set of faces right here. You can see if I zoom it down, let's go ahead and go into this mode. Yeah, now you can see it. And this right here has a bit of a concave look to it, kind of like a dome, and that is given the Atrium window, which has a bit of transparency and emission on it. Now, once again, it's because of the texture that it doesn't quite have the look that I am wanting to give it, to where it looks like there is a bit of atmosphere inside there. But I'm going to work on that, hopefully get that fixed for the next episode. Once again, I don't want to go too far into explaining about how this all works at this point of time, because I'm probably going to have more of a chance to do that in a future episode, which leads me to the final point of this episode. We're going to go ahead and close out, but just kind of let you know what to expect from the next episode is I'm going to be continuing to work on texturing the saucer section. In fact, I'm hoping to try to have all that done by the next episode. Maybe not necessarily before. We'll do some on the screen so I can go and kind of give you all a crash course on how to set up nodes. Um, Once again, warning, and I'll definitely tell you all in the next episode, I will rephrase, I don't really consider myself a expert at this on any particular set or means or a professional, but I'm kind of sitting down and showing you all about how to do it in real time while doing other things as well. So for the texture is concerned, I'm going to go ahead and decided on this saucer section. It's going to have the Oops, let's go ahead and go into solid mode. It's going to have the old traditional Aztec texturing on it that we've seen on traditional ships, but the secondary hull is going to have a bit of a different texture on it. It's kind of like a carbon fiber like look to it. Think back to the USS Relativity on Voyager to kind of know where I'm coming from on that. And all the windows on the top and on the bottom section of the secondary section are going to be textured in. So it's a lot of windows for me to have to model in on this particular ship, especially when the windows are supposed to be, you know, that small. So I'm going to use textures to put those all in rather than try to model them in. And if you want to see how I do that, you can go back into previous episodes. I think it might have been either episode 29 or maybe 28 where I talked about and demonstrated about how I did that. I think it was 28 about how I did this. See, these windows aren't modeled in. It's using this texture here, and it's only using the emission factor to where to it's emitting light kind of on these faces here. These are not modeled in any particular type of way or form. And I got to remember I got to do that, is that I quickly made that texture for these windows. I need to fix it because I want to make them rounded a little bit. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and call the episode right there. I just want to thank you all for watching, and this is B-Belt Dan, and this is the Enterprise J in Blender, and I will see you in the next episode.